Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming, for taking some time out of your day. I know teachers, you guys are on spring break, is that correct? So thanks for taking some time for that to come here. My name is Chris Eldridge, and I'm a pastor here in Ohio, in the Columbus area. I'm also the district chairperson for the Ministerial Health Commission. And several weeks ago, I reached out to Dr. Hartung, who's a former professor of mine from seminary, who's also a mentor and a friend. And I was just thinking, you know, with where we are right now in the midst of about a month-long quarantine order, that it might be beneficial to hear from Dr. Hartung about what it could like or what it may mean for us to minister and lead in the midst of a pandemic. Dr. Hartung has a lot of experience. He used to be a pastoral counselor, like doing it, and then he became a synod bureaucrat official in charge of the ministerial health for the synod, and then he became a seminary professor, and that's where I got to know him. So even though he's not ministered in a pandemic, I think he has a lot of experience that he may be able to help us consider and think through some stuff. So Dr. Hartung, it's good to have you with us this morning. Thanks for taking time.
Appreciate the opportunity, and I'm glad you reminded people that, like everyone else, we have not ministered in a pandemic, nor for the bulk of us experienced it. So we're all finding our way.
Yeah, there was a pastor in my circuit. I watched a little bit of one of his online services when it first started, and he had announced, he's like, I really want to talk to another pastor who has gone through this before, but sadly there are no pastors alive from 1918, and I appreciated that. So we all are in a new thing as teachers, principals, DCEs, deaconesses, and pastors. So it's a unique thing for all of us. So before we jump into the conversation, just want to let you all know that you can ask questions. Prefer if it came through the group chat, so go ahead and text in there. Kevin has everyone muted except for Dr. Hartung and me. So if you have a question, or even a comment, go ahead and put it in the chat box, and I will try to moderate that as well. So there are a couple of genres or categories of questions that Dr. Hartung and I will kind of be talking about, but if any of you have any comments or questions, definitely. So Philip, we'll just really quick, he just wrote, has anyone reached out to pastors in Liberia for their experiences from the Ebola outbreak a few years ago? I have not. I don't know if anyone else has. So if anyone else has, by all means, go ahead and type. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. So Dr. Hartung, our governor here in Ohio, Mike DeWine, was very proactive in the face of coronavirus before it even really began to hit here in Ohio. He did take some decisive and early decisions that affected many of our lives. Ohio was, if my memory serves correct, was the first state to do an extended spring break, which has now been extended into at least May 1st. So pretty quickly, our schools and our churches and then our social gatherings were severely curtailed. In my opinion, that's been pretty traumatic. And it seems that when something traumatic happens, you know, especially on a large scale, one of our natural tendencies is to get together, to cope, to grieve, to be with one another. Sadly, we're not able to do that. At least not with anyone outside of our families or small groups of people. So can you speak about our sense or our need of community and how we can cultivate it and meet that need when our typical ways of doing it are no more?
Well, to underline kind of what you just said, I think that we're all finding our way in this one. And I think the first step is to recognize what we've lost and what the meaning is of what we've lost. And then to see what connects as a result of that. So your sense of losing community, I was going to do this, but I thought it would be too traumatic, or not necessarily traumatic, but too whatever. I was going to open with this. But then I thought maybe that would be too monstrous or something like that. But we are in an older adult community that we moved into 5 months ago now, here in Rockville, Maryland, when we moved from St. Louis. And every time that I leave our apartment, I am required to put this on. So what I see in my new neighbors and colleagues is part of them always. So if I want a reminder of the shift and the change that's going on, all I have to do is look at my little mask and the mask of others, which has become quite a fashion plate for people. So I've got to get a much more fashion-oriented mask to go with some things so people can get some humor out of it. But I think that this is my symbol of the shift. My pain symbol is that I can no longer do what we moved here to do, among other things, which was to be closer to our son, one of our son's daughter-in-laws and 3 grandkids. So to be able to be part of their lives for a while and then now be prohibited actually from interaction. Maryland was quite early along with our 2 governors were leaders, by the way, Larry Hogan in Maryland and Dwyer in Ohio. And we really need to respect and honor them for their proactive thinking, I believe. Anyway, there are all these steps, all these differences that are going on. And I think that you can identify, first off, the kinds of different responses, because there's not a one-size-fits-all here, at least from my perspective. People are responding in very different ways, even in the people who are now in this new building that we were beginning to inhabit when this stopped. So there are differences, and part of the communication question or the community question for leaders in ministry, I think, is how they get enough information and stay close enough to their people to be able to know the kinds of things that are actually happening to them.
So the sense of community, physically we're not there anymore, but there's still ways to connect.
Sure.
In some
ways there is physicality, just a limitation and distance in it as well. And you've actually seen people, I think, and pastors and church leaders develop ways to stay connected, even though they're not physically connected. Our California grandkids, for instance, are at their desks from 9 in the morning with breaks until 2 in the afternoon with their teachers from school. You know, so there's that kind of business going on, but there's a loss of connectivity. I asked my grandson what he misses most, and he says without a minute's hesitation, I miss being with my friends. He's 12.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that's the piece in the whole in terms of people's responses. And there's some folks that are going to do that well and simply won't be particularly challenged. They're just going to go do that and do whatever they need to be doing. Mm-hmm. For some folks, it'll be somewhat more stressful. Some folks will be thrust into deeper stuff with this going on, and some folks that are already experiencing mental health challenges will be thrown into a real challenge, a deeper challenge in terms of what's going on. So I think we need to know what people's experiences are. And I think that's one of the fundamental tasks that we have of as church leadership, is to figure out ways to do that. And I've been in contact with a number of people anyway, that, are doing stuff like making contact, even though it's not going to be the physical together contact.
All right, so and Andrew Alberts just popped a question in, and I really like grief. That sounds weird to say this, but he just asked the question, because you've mentioned loss several times in the midst of community in addressing this question. He said, does it help to share the stages of grief with members? And he asked, is it okay for people to react differently to their losses? So there's two questions. Is it helpful to share the stages of grief, or I'm much more of a warden, tasks of grieving, to kind of teach them that where we are right now is we're grieving tremendous loss, whether you're grieving not seeing kids in your classroom, you're grieving not seeing for you your grandkids. For my wife, we live 3 miles from her parents, and they can't come over. Easter was really hard on me to finally see some of my members when they came for communion, but it kind of brought me down, like not knowing that I hadn't seen them in a while, and then seeing them. And so I'm wondering, or Albert or Andrew, sorry, is it beneficial to teach and to share what grief is and what that looks like for each, just in general?
Knowing me a little bit, Chris, you'll love this answer.
Uh-oh.
Which is you would expect it, which is, well, I think it depends. That's such a nice shrinky answer.
Yeah.
In terms of all that kind of business, it has to do with what people need, and at least for me. And I think that the deal is, does information to help people put into some kind of perception or some kind of understanding what they're experiencing. And I think, I can't, Andrew, read your mind, but if you're thinking or wondering if information helps people normalize what's happening to them and recognize that this is a common experience, that's what we often do when we have an opportunity to gather together in times of distress or problems. When we gather, we talk, and when we talk, we share experiences. And when we share experiences, then we understand that we're kind of not alone, that what it is that we're going through is something that other people are going through as well. So if the stages help people understand that they're actually going through something that somebody has written about because a number of people have participated in that and experienced it, then it's a wonderful thing. If it misses where people are at a given moment, then of course it's going to be an interesting intellectual exercise for them, but it will not be connected to where they're at. But the question of grief, and this is how we make this a conversation, Chris. I'm going to leave that to you because I tend to blather on like this, and people need to discover if this is actually, helpful in some way or another. But the grief business, I think, has the potential to be a really significant psychological and spiritual experience. If I, in spiritual direction or reflection, begin to catalog what I've lost in the experience of the pandemic, I can then begin to sort out where the holes are and decide in the discernment process, the things that I've lost, do I miss them? What's interesting for me about that is that there's some things that I really don't miss that I've lost. And that makes me wonder, why was I doing so much of that? And there's some things that I long for and deeply miss.
So in the midst of that longing, like longing to be with our members or our kids, if teacher, what do we do in the midst of that? What do we do in the midst of grieving something that we can't actually address yet? So, you know, the being together, you know, being back in your classroom, how do we adjust in the midst of that grieving?
I'll tell you that in a couple of weeks as we've walked through the experience. I mean, the first part of that is to recognize it and normalize it.
So to not brush it off and say, this isn't important, or you're just overreacting.
Certainly not condemn it.
Okay.
Identify what's going on and have some sense that it is quite likely that what's going on is shared. And the only way, of course, to do that is to be able to be talking about it with safe places. Now, there's going to be, because people respond differently, sometimes there's going to be things that go so deeply, like if people are struggling with a mental illness issue of depression or anxiety, they may be moving into arenas that are not commonly shared. But the general sense of anxiety, the general sense of anger. There is this study that is from the Department of something or other, Human Health and Services of the government. They do regularly a public sentiment analysis. Their current public sentiment analysis is the general sense of the American public. Now, there are, of course, exceptions to this, but the general sense of the American public is that they are ticked and they are sad. So is being angry in the midst of this stuff pathological? Now watch it from a spiritual point of view, because is it pathological to be in lament or anger? Is it pathological to be in a room with somebody that you may be married to, but you didn't sign up for quite this much connectivity? To be a little more irritated? Is that a sign of illness or whatever? Or is that something that we can all experience? I have been married to Judy, and she happily has been married to me for 52 years. We are discovering in this experience, because we are together more, because of both retirement and now being here, than we have been in a long, long time. And she is discovering some things about me that I don't think she likes in relationship to that. And we have an opportunity to work on that. Is that a pathology? I think it's part of the experience of what we're doing. So what I'm going after here is the normalization of most relationships, helping people come to terms with the fact that what they're experiencing is a fairly natural response to what they're in. And mad and sad, as the public sentiment analysis of HHS is about, is quite common. Mm-hmm. Now the question is how we help people as ministerial leaders, talk about emotional responses to what's happening? Can we set up ways, connections, communications, in which you can ask people fundamentally, how's it going? And get a flavor of the kinds of things that are going on in their lives and in their hearts.
Okay.
It's
So that,
impossible to do Zoom-wise or telephone-wise. Verizon is having a field day with telephone calls, for instance, that volume are way up. People are discovering the old technology.
yeah, I saw something that said that people are calling, I guess Mother's Day is the #1 day for calling, and we're doing more of that now than we do on the highest day of calling people. So yeah, there does seem to be opportunities for growth and for new things. Now, you have talked a little bit about, the emotional reaction in others and, connecting to them. I had an experience a couple of weeks ago when I was at Kroger trying to get some stuff. And in the midst of it, I got overwhelmed in the midst of Kroger, and I had to like stop in the middle of an aisle and just like do some deep breathing. It's like the stress in that moment and the anxiety overwhelmed me for a moment. And I'm just wondering, for all of us, because we're at home. Like I have a newborn, 2-month-old, and and trying to get all of that together just seems very normal for that to happen. But in the midst of when that happens, what do we do with that stress in the midst of it happening right then and there?
One of the neat things, Chris, is that your audio stopped
Uh-oh.
right at the point in which you started talking about stuff at home and came back in on we're having difficulty getting that together. So whatever it is that you're trying to get together, we don't know about, but at least we know about the dynamic, which is probably okay. Why is it that I'll try to do an example or two. Why is it that when I'm out walking with Judy or by myself, and people come toward me or I come to them on the sidewalk, that one of us goes into the street to walk by? Well, it's the pandemic. How come I get angry at that? It's a natural response, but I'm feeling something inside that I've never really felt as I've walked. How come I could get irritated more quickly in certain contexts? How come you can get more nervous? The thing. We have a nice little sort of neighborhoodish market that we go to now, and it's locally owned. Now you can't get in the market without having your mask, of course, which we now have on all the time, and putting on their nice little rubber gloves, these little plastic gloves. So now we're all looking like however we're looking, externally. The Surgeon General tells us that we should treat everyone as if they have the virus. That makes everyone potentially lethal to us. That is profoundly moving in terms of human relationships, and I get mad and sad about that.
Mm-hmm.
So for you, what you learned is deep breathing exercises to calm down.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a little meditational piece.
In the middle of Kroger, yeah.
In the middle of Kroger. When I walk, probably end up, sorry to say that because I don't know many of you here, some of you I know, but you'll understand. when I walk, I'm outside at least, and I can at least verbalize an expletive of some kind or another. Yeah, it's just sort of the feeling response. And this business of recognizing that we are in a traumatic situation, which goes back to your early question, that we are in a traumatic situation, and the acceptance, helping people accept what their experience is, and then find safe spaces to talk about that experience rather than bottling it up and not talking about it, is a crucial piece. And we are in a position in which we cannot as easily do that, because our tendency, as you said, to come together as a community is blocked by what I would prefer to call physical distance. As you know, because you and I have talked a little bit about this, I'm really uncomfortable with using social distance. We need social intimacy while we have physical distance.
So one of I do like that, the difference between social and physical. Like some of the comments that I've been seeing right here, like Mara, hopefully I said your name right. She had commented that, she's doing personal Zoom or FaceTime calls with her students and families.
Nice.
And, having some form of communication. Then someone else wrote that I've written letters and sent more cards than I've ever did before. Because some of, I'm assuming students or kids don't have internet. And so they're grieving at home. And so having some form of human contact, even if it's through, not kids, but elderly. Sorry, Janet. Having some form of contact is beneficial to know that I'm not alone. Sometimes I think our thinking can be skewed. We can go too far, and we need something else to balance that. And so kind of what you're saying is, with our communicating with someone who is safe and, lamenting together, grieving together and processing what you're going through. I mean, to call out one of my friends in here, the only Ohio district person, Patrick, friend from college and seminary, we were on the phone for 80 minutes yesterday. Just connecting again. And, sometimes we need to find that place to connect, and it's not ideal, but it's something that we are doing right now to maintain some form of social intimacy, is the word you just used.
Right. The grief is that it is not the same. There's a loss in not being physically present. That is a grief, and it's part of my mad and sad response.
Which is normal and to be expected.
That's what I keep telling myself, and thank you for thank you, because I think that's true. But that doesn't mean that, see, the danger is that the mad and sad, especially the sad side, creates more distance for us, and we get less creative about stuff and sort of shut down in either depression or just irritation, like this is a bunch of crud. I'm done with all this kind of stuff. The danger is that we pull further away in terms of isolation. And it is helpful for leaders to recognize that tendency, if they have a tendency to do that, and also to seek more assertively connections. We know, I know we may get to stress issues, but we know from the research of the last 15 years on stress that one of the natural things that helps people in stress and mitigates most all, among other things, but mitigates most all the physical effects that we thought of stress, and stuff, is actually to be in conversation with people, that is to be pro-social, and also to start doing things to help people. That is, the actual helping people mitigates our own personal stress, even physiologically.
So what would that, so when you say helping people, I'm just, my thinking is we tend to denigrate or downplay our helping in the house. Like you're helping your kid or your family, or I think we always look outside of our home. And since, you know, we're all being forced into our homes, that I'm wondering if that type of helping is a way to mitigate, or is it really helping that person outside? Helping the one in your home, is that good enough to help mitigate some stress?
I'm sure hoping so.
I appreciate your honesty right there.
Well, you know, I want to go back to our opening comments. We're kind of all in this together, working our way through it. The pandemic is not anything, at least that the bulk of us have experienced. And this kind, I mean, who of us would have thought that this kind of a shutdown, this kind of a staying home, this kind of an economic, I mean, I saw that 5 million more people filed for unemployment insurance. You know, this is catastrophic in many ways. And people are going to respond to the trauma in varying ways. What can we do? We can stay as connected as we can to people that are safe for us and operate in a, I'm going to work as actively as I can in connection and making connection with other people. So for the pastoral thing, I mean, is you all are, or the school thing, I mean, this business of writing notes and being in contact electronically, and telephone calls and all that kind of business. That's a creative start that takes energy. So if you're too mad or too sad, you're less likely to do that. So talking to people about your own emotional experience where that's safe to do so is an important component of things, and then you become more energized. The spirit is more alive and at work. Well, the spirit is not more alive. I never said that, folks.
Dr. Hartung, Julie just commented about something, and something that my wife has said, being a special education teacher. Julie wrote, I am struggling with those families who are not answering phone calls or responding to any form of communication. I think this could apply to not just teaching, but, you know, as for pastors and other church workers. How, you know, we're trying to be creative, we're trying to reach, but we're not getting responses. And I know, you know, sometimes we have to put things where they belong, and we can't take ownership of something that we have no control or power over. But how do we balance that, reaching out, trying to serve, trying to help, and not getting it? How do we
not being able
that?
to help?
Yeah, or not, and maybe even not being allowed to help.
Yeah. Well, that's part of what would make anybody who tries to help mad and sad, right? You know, that there's some folks in their responses that will not respond.
And so then what's our response then, to say, well, that's just, they're not going to respond? Like,
well, it depends on how much energy you have. The John Gottman thing of people turning toward, turning away, turning against. When people turn away, that is the most destructive response to relationships. It's better for people to be angry at you than for you to be ignored.
Mm.
So that's a clear motivational problem. How much do I stay trying to do that, and how much energy do I have? So I think part of the answer to the question, at least for me, is how much energy do I have to keep connected? The other piece, though, in a pandemic, I mean, I don't know what the restrictions are in Ohio, but you know, it's possible to. There are these interesting things in which people actually try to connect more physically. Hey, my cousin's wife is in an assisted living facility in outside of St. Mary's, Ohio, actually.
Hmm.
The local priest came to the outside window. This is a one-story facility. Came to the outside window and stood 4 or 5 feet outside the window and talked with a resident. My cousin's daughter sent me a picture of this. Well, it's a creative piece. You know, if people won't respond to your telephone calls or whatever, I don't know if in Ohio you need a letter in case the police stop you.
That's news to me. I've not heard anything about that.
Okay, good. That's all right. But every employee here has a letter from this institution saying that they belong on the road to come to work.
Wow.
In case they get stopped. Now, Maryland will not stop you unless you are involved in some traffic violation, apparently. But if you are involved in a traffic violation, then you'll probably be asked, why were you driving?
Hmm.
And if you were like the 7 kids that got pulled over in California, did you see that?
I did
There were
not.
7, they're not kids. They're young 20s, millennials who are, they happen to think of themselves as untouchable by the virus. They did a traffic thing. They got pulled over by the California Highway Patrol. And CHP saw that there were 8 or 7 people in the car or something. They got them all out. They all got $1,000 fines for disobeying the restrictions in California. Maryland is that way with the $1,000 fine, or as Governor Hogan reminds us, 6 months in jail.
Wow. So this is interesting because this actually ties into my question on stress now, which is, we don't know when this is going to end. Like, I know for me, I'm like waiting to hear what's going to happen on May 1st. Is Ohio going to open back up? What's going to happen? And then, the fear or the concern that this is going to come back. This is very stressful, I think, for every person. Well, like you said, that government thing about sad and mad, and we're barely a month into this. What's the danger of prolonged stress as it relates to our ability to minister and lead? I mean, I know you've hinted at some pieces of this, like, the creativity decreases, but, we're in a very ambiguous time right now. We don't know who's got what's going to happen. I haven't seen the offerings for my church for March. And I'm not saying I'm like nervous or anxious, but there's just this uncertainty of everything. And it's like, one of my concerns for church workers and for all of us is, if this moves into the summer, like it's like it's going to bear down even more on us. And what's the, I don't want to say what's the danger, but what do we do then? Like, you've talked about mitigating some stress, but what's the prolonged effect of being in a stressful situation like this that none of us have experience with?
Well, I think, Chris, and I keep reminding you all that we're in this together, and I'm walking through this like you're walking through this. So it's not like I've been through a pandemic and have,
Personal experience.
figured it out.
Yeah.
And in some way in the United States, we haven't either at this level. But the assumption is, I'm going to go off a little bit to spiritual warfare kinds of things. There are in a Christian's life, there are varying times of feeling closer or more distant with Jesus. In the times of more desolation or more distance, the spiritual move really is to keep doing what you were doing that helped you stay spiritually well and more satisfied. So the movement from spiritual desolation to spiritual consolation, because the consolation always comes, actually. In desolation, one continues to do that which was healthy for you, even though it may not feel so healthy or rewarding. That is, you stay with the routine, with the kinds of things that brought you aid and care in the first place.
So keep on keeping on.
Absolutely. So the kinds of things that were good for you before the pandemic, they are, if they can't happen in the way that they did, that gets mourned. But you also keep going with the kinds of things that were good for you, even though they may not feel so good for you. That is as rewarding. And in the long term. So what is it is good for me? What's good for me is to have conversations with people that have some depth to them in safe spaces. What's good for me is to talk about my spiritual life with someone that I trust. Frankly, in an epidemic, I've discovered that I don't really want to do that as much because I'm mad and sad.
Mm-hmm.
So I do it anyway, though, because that's the lifeline, the lifelines, in this case, in the body of Christ, that were important for me. Also, there are some things that you need to do as maybe substitutes for it. That's why we are not confined to our homes, because an essential feature, an essential thing to do is to go walking and get exercise.
It's I remember when I was in my counseling program, I forget the guy's name, but therapeutic lifestyle changes, and one of them is exercise.
Sure.
And another one is being out in nature. Another one is service to others.
Yes.
One of the other ones, I think there's seven or eight. Another one is religion, spirituality.
Sure. So keep doing what you were doing. So, for instance, I have offered, this may sound sort of strange, but I have offered to walk with people and bark so that they can exercise, so that they can rationalize walking their dog. That is, I've offered to be people's dog just to go outside with them, or something like that. And people don't need me to bark, but they can recognize that we can walk together. There are a group of 3 of us guys in this building that walk regularly. Judy and I walk at least twice a day. What happens when we walk is we see people. When we see people, we stop, and with our masks on, 6 to 10 feet away, we have conversation. Sometimes that conversation gets actually into how are you doing? How are you doing gets into deeper conversation.
And
That
for you,
is
that's
very,
beneficial.
very refreshing. We have reconfigured our apartment so that we can actually sit 10 feet apart and have a glass of wine after dinner because we cannot any longer eat dinner together as a community. Now, only 2 people at a time. And everything gets wiped down that we can wipe down before we get there. I think that that's not maybe totally legal. At least people will say, I think administration would say, we don't really like you doing that. And I give them articles. I mean, I'm feeding administration here articles because they're scared to death of in a older adult community that does have assisted living and memory care and specialized nursing care. They're scared to death that the coronavirus will come here. Rightly so. 45 people in a nursing home in Richmond, Virginia have died in one nursing home. 45 people. You have those kinds of draconian statistics. And of course, the administrators are rightly anxious. On the other hand, I feed them articles about remember how the immune system functions. If we are too isolated, immune systems will decrease in their capacities to do well. We know that. We've known that for 15 years. That's why human connectedness is absolutely crucial in terms of what's going on. So we need to find ways to be connected. So what do you do when you walk? You often meet people that you know. At least I say to everybody who walks that I pass, even if I have to yell because they're gone on the street, which irritates me, as I told you, good afternoon or good morning, or something about how are you? And I stop, and I'm slow down long enough because I'd like to hear an answer.
Mm-hmm. So Dr. Hartung, I must have missed this question because Patrick just texted me and said, don't forget
Patrick,
the question about alcohol.
District, but hi, Patrick. When I saw you down there, I thought maybe you'd taken a call.
I'm trying.
To Ohio.
I'm trying to get him into Ohio.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. What was the question on alcohol? I'm sorry, guys. I missed that. Whoever asked it, do you want to unmute or because I missed that one.
How do you self-care and how do you talk with others about use of alcohol?
Well, I am a wine drinker, but I'm also I was raised in an alcoholic family. So I have, so I want to say that sort of in defense of the after dinner drink kind of thing. So I have rules that I don't drink by myself ever. So it is in a social relationship. The New York Times business section, Tuesday, April 14, has how the virus transformed the way Americans spend money. If you look at the graph, so all the stuff that we know is going to be trouble, economic trouble, health and entertainment and restaurants, transportation, shopping and travel are all way down. So you can begin to identify for your congregation, even congregational members, who's obviously going to be in trouble economically for some time. But on the bottom is more spending, and at least in a small circle is alcohol. So that's on the side of more spending, not less. In Montgomery County, Maryland, and well, in Maryland, I guess generally, but in Montgomery County, which is a county that controls alcohol sales, they have declared wine and beer stores to be essential stores.
So then what should we be, so Patrick asked a question, which I think ties in or could tie in here. What are some signs or indications or symptoms in these times that I or those I serve might be struggling with what's happening but may not be aware of? So you you kind of have some rules or guidelines for your drinking of wine, but for other people, what would be some of the ways of, other than, looking at your credit card statement and going, oh, wow, I spent $400 on alcohol this month. What are some other things that we can be watching for when it relates to either alcohol or someone just put in the XXX church, because I remember hearing you say that pornography use has gone up.
Well,
oh, sorry, something just happened.
Yeah, okay. A lot of things are happening because of the stay-at-home stuff. Washington, D.C., social centers for domestic violence are overwhelmed now. Watch out for what's happening on the domestic violence scene. The group, at least the best group from my perspective, Enough is Enough group, which monitors issues related to children, alerts us that the increased use of electronics has the tendency to make our kids more vulnerable to be able to get into explicit sexual material.
So
there are a lot.
Being at home increases the accessibility to overconsume on food, alcohol, sex.
Right. So the anger, mad and sad that you're now taking out physically on your partner. So it's a larger, my point is it's a larger question, Chris, about how we begin to know what's going on. And my only relevant answer, I think, to that is you can't do that without being in contact with people. And so your follow-up work with people, with your students, with the families of your students, with your parishioners, my hope is that everybody has, in the smaller parishes, church leaders are calling everybody on a regular basis, regardless of whether they've been in church, before the pandemic regularly. Everybody on your list gets a call, engagement about what it is that's going on. In that call is just, I'm calling, we're in a pandemic. How you doing? Maybe you go electronic with that. Maybe in larger groups, or in larger churches, you have a calling tree of elders or other church leaders that then talk to the pastor about further conversations as things emerge. But the first piece is you've got to know what's going on. And the usual contacts are not necessarily there anymore, at least physical contact. So get a plan going in which you're making regular contacts. In order to do that, you've got to be handling your mad and sad stuff. I do want to say also, while I'm thinking about this, and I know we're moving into more limited time arena, that American Bible Society has a curriculum on healing from the distress of COVID-19. American Bible Society has a trauma healing institute.
Hmm.
So on their website, it's a pilot edition that has to do with it. And I believe also because Fresh Hope is a group, an LCMS group that really is talking about mental health issues. So if you can do www.Fresh Hope or at least Google Fresh Hope, they are offering through the American Bible Society Trauma Healing Institute a 2-hour free session designed to help those who are struggling with emotion, stress, and anxiety created by COVID-19.
Oh, wow, that's really cool.
So these two resources are really quite quite useful, I believe. And the Trauma Healing Institute for American Bible Society, the click-in was healing from the distress of the COVID-19 crisis. And it really is a curriculum of conversation that you might consider using as you offering it.
Okay, that's really good. Thanks for that. I
In terms
was
of
not aware
things
of
that are
that.
particularly helpful.
Okay.
And one of the healing is, and one of the questions now when you're talking to people, the two reflection questions that are in the ABS curriculum for healing have to do with what is helping you cope with the situation and what's hindering you coping with the situation.
So those are the questions that we would ask.
That you would ask in even a telephone call.
So this American Bible Trauma and Healing curriculum is a tool that church leaders, teachers, pastors, deaconesses, everyone can use to help them have a conversation with their people.
Yes.
Is it free?
It's free.
Oh, good.
It's free for download. Also, the 2-hour interactive piece, it looks to me like is free. And you can see that because that's through Fresh Hope. You can sign up for that.
Okay.
And, but the first piece is finding where it is that people are and the cope with the situation, what's helping you cope and what's hindering you from coping, underlines one of the basic issues about dealing with stress and crisis. And that is you don't stay with just the problem. You also work with people to identify the skills that they're using to cope. So what are you doing well is as important an issue is what are the struggles in what your problems are. We are, as a culture, much more tilted toward the disease than the wellness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're kind of asking, or not asking, but bringing in a solution-focused technique. People tend to focus on the problem and not solutions that have worked in the past that they may have lost sight of in the midst of their stuff.
That's certainly one way to think about it in terms of solution focus. For me, I think about it as people need to be reminded of their strengths in the midst of their struggles. And people are actually surviving.
And I would add thriving too, some.
Yeah, they're adapting. They're engaging. They're thinking about how to be creative in a situation.
Mm-hmm.
That's happening out there too. And what as religious leaders we do has to do with, we can also in conversation speak into the issues with God and Jesus. And I was wondering, you know, kind of like how people do this, but those of you who are in the regular pericopes, I think, because the traditional pericope following Easter is the disciples gathered and the Thomas story, right?
Mm-hmm.
The disciples were gathered in a room. They were staying at home for fear of the Jews. We stay at home for fear of the COVID-19 virus. And through those walls comes Jesus. Now, if that isn't a preachable text for this experience, I hardly know what is. Well, there are lots of them, probably. The children of Israel in the diaspora, the children of Israel in the wilderness, Revelation, who offers us the crown of life. Crown, Spanish, corona.
Ah, I never saw that one. I didn't pay attention in Spanish class, so.
There's all kinds of stuff in our religious tradition that helps us speak into situations, seems like to me. The fundamental one for me is always, and this I learned from Ignatius actually, finding God in whatever the experience is and identifying that.
I like that.
Jesus' presence alongside us, the promise of our Jesus always walking with us. That's their period. We can speak to that, but we can't speak to that, I don't think, just in the abstract. I mean, we can, but my encouragement is we speak to that in the context of relationships with our people, and that we can learn in community and connectivity with people. And then our creativity has to do with how it is that we connect with people then under those circumstances, when we cannot do that personally.
So there's a lot of opportunity right now. So Dr. Hartung, the last question I have for you, and if anyone wants to ask any questions, please put it in the chat. So with your experience, what is your greatest concern for professional church workers during this time? What is your main concern, if you will?
I don't know that I have a main concern, actually. So how about that for an answer? But I do have concerns, you know, because whatever our people are experiencing, we are also. So everything that we have talked about is a concern. Church workers get lonely. Church workers get angry. Church workers get sad. Church workers are disconnected more from the very thing that they are in the business of church work to do. Pastors that can't be in the way that they are accustomed to being when someone dies. I mean, this is all deep stuff that is fostered by the coronavirus or COVID-19. It's there. You are often speaking to a camera and don't have the feedback of how people are responding to you. I mean, this is a new time with new experience. So if there's a fear, it would be that our church workers, well, and teachers that love and miss their students, my goodness. So the fear would be that folks in their sadness and madness and anxiety distance socially and stop connecting and sit alone with their loneliness.
So there is, for us, we need to be reaching out, but at the same time, we need other people to reach out to us.
You bet, which they may or may not do.
I know, it's really hard for me to call members of my church because my wife's teaching during the day, and with a 2-month-old and a 4-year-old, my days are pretty full. And so I started emailing the last 2 weeks, majority of my congregation, and almost every single person had asked, and I just said two sentences: how are you doing? Is there anything I can get for you? And I would get emails like this big, like people would type. Almost every person, I'll say 90%, asked, how are you and your family doing? And that meant a lot to me. So yeah, there is that, we reach out, but we also need people to reach in for us.
And when you respond, see, I would encourage you to respond by saying, well, under the circumstances of being physically distant, we're doing whatever you're doing. We're struggling with this. We're doing this well.
So it's an opportunity for relationships to deepen, for us to connect with our people, even though they're physically, we're not there.
Right. And then my encouragement is while you're connecting, connect to God, because that's part of what we regularly do as part of our spiritual journey. But since God is bigger than we are, it would be useful to connect rawly and honestly.
I like that. I'm a big fan of lament and crying out to God and frustration and anger.
Sometimes I end up with, I think, it's a direct violation of the first commandment. But I think I would be a better God than you're being right now to us. See? Now, is somebody going to tell me that, and I repent of that in some ways, but I know that God can handle that because the Jesus who is incarnate walks with me and us.
We are free to cry out in whatever way that comes out.
And actually are invited to do so. It's more than a personal freedom. It's an invitation. Come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden. Come to me.
Call out to me in the day of trouble. Psalm 50, I think.
What's going on?
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're hitting our time. So I hope you all found this beneficial, or at least something beneficial for you. And keep reaching out and connecting. I do want to give a plug in for my team. There are caregivers in the district. Reach out to them. They are provided to church workers and their families, and they will talk with you through Zoom or sadly not in person right now, but also through phone calls. You've got the information on the district website, which I actually don't know off the top of my head. So just Google Ohio District LCMS caregivers, and you have it. So they'll gladly walk with you during this time. Reach out to Kevin Wilson. Feel free to reach out to me as well. So yeah, thank you, Dr. Hartung, for this time, and I pray you and Judy stay well and you don't catch anything. And I don't know why, I think I will always remember your thing about let me be the bark, the dog thing. I don't know why, that just is staying with me right now. So,
in a way, whatever it takes to
yeah,
maintain a connection.
yeah, yeah. So thank you, everyone, and God be with you and us all during this time.
And may the holy angels surround us all with health and well-being. And may the virus influence and the dark spirits that engage that darkness be bound by the light of Christ and the Holy Spirit's energy.
There we go. I'll just say an amen to that. All right. Have a good Thursday, everyone. All right. Bye.
Bless you all.